Last year, I messed up my ankle pretty badly and was stuck in the house for weeks. I live alone in a small bungalow, so when it happened, my family and friends were super helpful. But soon enough, I realized I'd have to figure out how to maintain my yard without bothering them too much. Everyone in my neighborhood really cares about their lawns. Everything is neatly cut, the hedges are sculpted, and almost every yard has flower beds. Mine isn't anything fancy, just some flowers near the porch and mostly grass that I usually mow every weekend. Since I didn't want to hire an expensive lawn service for just a couple of weeks, I decided to look on Craigslist for someone to handle it temporarily. I found this ad from a guy named Tyler. The listing said he'd just finished high school and was looking to do odd jobs before college. Yard work was specifically mentioned, so I figured he'd be perfect for what I needed. I reached out and Tyler responded quickly. He seemed excited to get started. We agreed he'd come by once a week to cut the grass, water the plants, pull any weeds, and pick up fallen branches. Shouldn't take him more than an hour or two each time. Tyler showed up the next week, but I was immediately thrown off. He looked way too old to have just graduated. The guy had deep lines around his eyes and a full beard that made him look at least 35. I awkwardly asked him about it, and he chuckled nervously before saying he just looked older than he really was. He admitted that he hadn't updated his ad in a while, claiming he meant to change it a couple of years back. Seemed more like a decade to me. Still, he was already there, so I figured I'd give him a shot. I gave him the rundown of what needed to be done, then went back inside to catch up on some work. I was working part-time from home back then, and tried to focus, but I couldn't help sneaking a few glances out the window. Tyler moved slower than I expected, but seemed thorough. After an hour or so, he finished up. I paid him in cash. He gave me a small nod and left without much small talk. The second week was odd. The yard work hadn't changed, but Tyler stayed for nearly 3 hours. I wasn't paying him by the hour, so I couldn't figure out why he was hanging around for so long. He finally wrapped up and left after what felt like forever. The following week was his last, and it got even weirder. He seemed to be taking his time again, and I noticed him lingering around some of the windows and corners of the house. It looked like he was trying to wipe down the windows, but that wasn't part of what I asked him to do. I stayed out of sight, watching him quietly through a crack in the blinds, trying to figure out what he was up to. Eventually, he finished and came to the door for his pay. I handed over the cash, trying to act casual, and then watched as he drove off. I was relieved I didn't have to deal with him anymore. Something about him felt off, and I was tired of the uneasy feeling he gave me. That night, around 1 a.m., I was still up scrolling through my phone. I've always been a night owl, so staying up late wasn't unusual. But then I heard it. The soft creak of a window being pushed up somewhere at the back of the house. My stomach dropped. There was no doubt in my mind it was Tyler. It just had to be him. Maybe it was just paranoia, but I was certain. I sat up in bed, listening carefully, and then heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the house. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to act. I stepped out into the hallway and shouted as loudly as I could, saying I knew it was him and that I had a gun. Total lie, I didn't own one, but I needed to scare him off. To my shock, I heard the footsteps retreat. There was a scramble of movement, followed by the distinct sound of someone pushing themselves back out the window. I cautiously crept out to the living room, my heart racing. The window was wide open. I rushed over and glanced outside. Just as I thought, there he was, Tyler, sprinting across the yard and disappearing down the street. The next morning, I went straight to the police with everything I had, his name, his number, even the messages we'd exchanged. It wasn't hard for them to track him down. His ad was still up on Craigslist. Looking back, I'm thankful I hadn't gone to bed early that night. If I hadn't been awake, I can't even imagine what could have happened. A while back, I was trying to find a place to rent, and I turned to Craigslist. I was crashing at my cousin's house and needed to get my own spot soon. They weren't being pushy, but I could tell they were itching to have their space back. I got the message, and I started checking listings on Craigslist, which is like a digital flea market for anyone who's never used it. The good thing was, I didn't have a lot of stuff to move. My entire life could fit into a truck bed. Just a bed, a dresser, a fish tank, and a couple of bags. So I was on the lookout for a tiny studio. After skimming through some bizarre listings and dodging a few scammers, I found something that seemed too good to be true. A fully furnished studio apartment in a decent part of town. The pictures looked amazing. It had everything I'd ever want and then some. I called up the owner, and after a short conversation, we set the move-in date for the upcoming Monday, provided I could wire the deposit by Friday. It was Wednesday at the time, so I had just enough time to scrape together the cash and transfer it over. He wanted $500 up front, which was a little over half the monthly rent. The owner reassured me that this would cover the first month, considering it was the middle of the month. That sounded fair. He even mentioned I wouldn't have to pay again until the first of the next month, which would be $750. Seemed like a solid deal to me. Monday rolled around, and I showed up with my truck loaded up. The owner was already waiting for me outside. We had a quick chat, and he showed me around. The place was better in person than I'd imagined, furnished to the brim. I even asked him why it had so much stuff, like it was someone's lived-in home. He mentioned it used to be an Airbnb, which made sense, and he was just done with the hassle of short-term renters. He wanted someone stable. Sounded perfect. I thanked him and promised I'd have the full rent on the first. I signed the lease he had printed out, and we parted ways. I was excited, but that excitement didn't last. By Wednesday, my third day in, things started going downhill fast. By Wednesday evening, I was lounging on the couch, flipping through channels, when I heard voices coming from the hallway. I didn't think much of it, probably just neighbors passing by. But then, I heard a key slide into the lock. My heart jumped. The door creaked open, and a couple walked in. The next few seconds were a mess of confusion and panic. They stared at me like I was some sort of burglar. I was equally stunned, looking at them like they were breaking into my place. For a solid moment, none of us moved. Then, they demanded to know who I was, and I told them I was the new tenant. They shot back that they were the tenants. We all started talking over each other, voices getting louder and more desperate. Turns out, they were the actual tenants. They had just been on vacation for a couple of weeks. I, on the other hand, had unknowingly been renting a unit that was still theirs. After a lot of back and forth, we all laid out our documents. I showed them my flimsy lease agreement, and they pulled out their legit, much more professional-looking lease. I brought up the texts and email exchanges I had with Mario, or whoever that scammer was, along with proof of the $500 deposit I sent. But it didn't matter. They lived there. I didn't. The worst part? They had no clue who this Mario guy was. The name didn't ring any bells. I was crushed. We called the cops to file a report, and they treated the whole thing like some twisted comedy of errors. In the end, I apologized for using their stuff, eating their food, sitting on their couch, and we came to an agreement. I could leave my few belongings there for a couple of days while I moved back to my cousin's place. Mostly it was just my fish tank and dresser, since those were the hardest things to move. Luckily, they were super chill about it. I mean, they had every right to kick me out on the spot, but they didn't. No one got violent or anything. I was grateful for that. Sadly, I never managed to track down the guy who tricked me, and I lost the $500 I'd paid. I did stay in touch with the real tenants for a little while after that, and they told me they had their locks changed right away. No one ever figured out how that guy got a hold of the key to their place. So yeah, that's the story of how I ended up squatting in someone else's apartment. A couple of months later, I did find a legit place through Craigslist, and this time it worked out fine. No unexpected guests or anything. I know this whole situation isn't the kind of horror story that makes your skin crawl, but it's still eerie to think about. That guy had planned it all out, knew they'd be away, and somehow had the keys to get in. It's the kind of thing that makes you double-check your locks before going to bed, just in case. Even though everything got sorted out, it still lingers in the back of my mind as a weird, unsettling reminder that some people can slip right into your life without you even knowing it. They say hindsight's 20/20, right? Looking back now, I see all the red flags I should have caught. It was 2008, and I had just hit 25. I finally managed to move into a place of my own. Nothing big, just a small one-bedroom rental, but I was proud. Fresh out of college with a new job at a small finance firm, I was getting my life together, or so I thought. Money was tight though, so I was living off what I made every 2 weeks. To get some extra cash, I started selling stuff I didn't need on Craigslist. Mostly old gadgets and cheap paintings. It worked before, so I figured I'd try again. I posted an ad for an old phone I no longer used, and within hours, I got an email. A guy wanted to buy it and was available to meet that day. I didn't feel good about letting strangers into my place, so I suggested we meet up at a nearby diner. He agreed, and we set a time for the evening. When it was time, I grabbed the phone and charger, jumped in my car, and headed out. The diner was about 20 minutes away. As I pulled into the lot, I noticed it wasn't that crowded, which seemed normal for a weeknight. Nothing odd about that. But now that I think about it, I do remember 2 cars parked side by side. A beat-up blue Honda and a shiny black Jeep. I didn't connect any dots then. I parked close to the door, texted the buyer to let him know I'd arrived, and waited. He replied that he'd be there in 5 minutes. I put on some music and zoned out. Sure enough, a few minutes later, a guy in a hoodie steps out of that black Jeep and heads towards me. The exchange went smoothly. He handed me cash, I gave him the phone, and we both thanked each other before going our separate ways. But as I headed back home, something felt off. I made a few random turns, and that's when I noticed a blue car, one that looked just like the Honda from the diner, sticking close behind me. I still didn't connect it to the diner, thinking it was just a coincidence. The longer it followed me, though, the more uneasy I felt. I was about a block away from home when I glanced back and noticed the car turning onto another street. That made me feel better. I shook off the nerves and made it home without any issues. I stepped inside, locking the door with a shaky hand. I tossed some leftover pizza into the microwave and tried to calm down. Maybe it was all just in my head. After eating, I decided a hot shower might help me relax. The tension started to ease, and I was almost ready to crawl into bed and forget about everything. But then I remembered I left the curtains in the living room open. I didn't like the thought of anyone being able to peek in, so I went to close them. As I got closer to the window, I noticed something odd at the end of my driveway. My heart jumped into my throat. A car was sitting there, half hidden by the shadows. I squinted, trying to get a better look, and felt a wave of dread. It was that same blue Honda I'd seen earlier. I stood frozen, staring out into the dark. My first instinct was to check the door again. Still locked, thank God. I backed away and flipped on the porch light. That's when I saw it more clearly. The car was empty. The driver must have left on foot. I had no clue where they were, but they were close, too close. Hands trembling, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The operator asked me to stay calm, said officers were on their way. I tried to keep it together, but then I heard it. The sound of footsteps creaking on the porch. My heart hammered as I turned off the lights, hoping they'd think no one was home. It didn't work. The footsteps didn't stop. I dared to peek around the corner, just enough to catch a glimpse, and there he was, a guy standing right against the glass, his face covered. He was staring into the dark living room. He didn't move, just stood there. We locked eyes, and I almost screamed. For a second, I couldn't do anything but whisper, "Police are on their way. Get out of here." My voice was shaking, more like a plea than a threat. I knew I didn't sound convincing. But then, like a miracle, I saw blue and red lights flashing down the street. The guy must have seen them too, because he jerked back and bolted. Within seconds, the cops were pulling up, tires screeching as they blocked the driveway. The guy and two others I hadn't even seen ran toward their car, but it was too late. The police were already on them, cuffing them one by one. As they led the men away, I realized I knew one of them. It was the guy earlier, the one with the black Jeep. He didn't say a word, just kept his head down. One of the officers turned to me and said, "This kind of thing happens more often than you think." I nodded numbly, but my mind was racing. What if I hadn't closed the curtains? What if I'd ignored that feeling? After my mother passed, the farmhouse became mine, her last tangible gift, a place stuffed with echoes of her life. It wasn't just the photographs in frames or the clothes that still carried her perfume. It was the furniture, the knickknacks, the stacks of letters in drawers. Every inch of it felt like her. And in those first months, that was a comfort. But as time went on, I began to notice the weight of it all. It's strange how a chair can become a reminder, how a table can feel like it's looking at you, holding secrets you don't want to face. The dining set was the biggest offender. Solid oak, 6 chairs with curved backs, a leaf extension that slid in smooth as butter. I could still smell lemon polish clinging to the grain, as if every Sunday roast and holiday gathering had seeped into the wood itself. I'd walk past it and hear the scrape of forks, the murmur of conversations from years gone by. Sometimes it felt like if I sat down there alone, I'd see her hands at the far end, pouring coffee, telling me to take another roll. For over a year, it sat untouched in the dining room like a shrine. I told myself I'd keep it, maybe even use it if I had company. But nobody ever came. And the truth was, I couldn't bring myself to sit there. It was too full of her voice. So one afternoon, I took photos, good ones, bright light from the window, close-ups of the grain, even a couple with a measuring tape stretched across the surface so buyers could see the exact size. I listed it for $1,200, slightly negotiable. In a place like Denton Hollow, North Carolina, That was fair, more than fair. I didn't expect a rush of offers. Craigslist isn't exactly booming out here. Still, I figured eventually someone with a truck and a taste for quality would bite. Weeks passed. A few half-hearted messages trickled in. Lowball offers. Vague, still available inquiries. But nothing serious. By the time the phone rang that night, I'd half forgotten the ad was still up. It was a little after 9. I was half watching some true crime rerun on TV, the kind of background noise you don't really pay attention to. Then my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something, habit, boredom, maybe just that instinct you can't explain, made me pick it up. Hello? For a moment, nothing, just faint static. Then a voice, male, thin, raspy, and off. You still got that table? I sat up. A prickle started in the back of my neck. Yeah, I said, it's in great shape. There was another pause, long enough that I thought maybe we'd been disconnected. Then, is it heavy? Pretty heavy, yeah, solid oak. I want to come see it. I've got cash. You home tonight? There was something about the way he emphasized "you home tonight" that didn't sit right. The word slid under my skin like a splinter. I told myself I was being paranoid. He sounded older, maybe just awkward. Small towns attract their fair share of eccentrics. Sure, I said slowly. I'm about 15 minutes east of Denton Hollow. Want the address? Another pause. Then, I know where that is. I'll be there in an hour. And just like that, he hung up. I stood there a second, phone still in my hand. Something about it felt unfinished, wrong. But I shook it off. Maybe he was just brisk. Not everyone's chatty. I went to the dining room, gave the table one last wipe down, straightened the chairs, adjusted the centerpiece, checked for smudges, kept glancing at the clock. An hour, he'd said. I expected I'd have time to tidy up, maybe even put coffee before he showed. But at 9:16, 17 minutes after the call, the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the quiet house. I glanced out the front window. The porch light threw a long shadow through the frosted glass, stretching toward the street. When I opened the door, my throat tightened. He was tall, easily 6'4", rail thin, with the kind of leanness that doesn't look like fitness, but hunger. His white undershirt was stained yellow around the collar and under the arms. His jeans were loose, torn at the knee. His shoes didn't match, one brown, one black. But it was his eyes, bloodshot, darting, restless, in a way that wasn't about curiosity. It was about calculation. "Evening," he rasped. Every instinct in me said, don't let him in. But old habits, small-town politeness, the kind that gets people in trouble, made me step aside. "Dining room's just through here," I said. He didn't thank me. He shuffled in slow. His gaze flicked over the walls, the corners, the hallways, like he was mapping the place. He ran his fingers along the table's edge, underneath, over the chairs. His nails were long, yellowed. Every so often, he made this sound, not a whistle, not quite a hum, just a little noise in the back of his throat, like a person trying to mimic human behavior without really knowing how. "I'm asking $1,200, I said, trying to cut the tension, "but I'm open to offers." That's when he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, too wide, showing more teeth than felt natural. 500. I actually laughed. Short, nervous. That's way too low. I could maybe go down to 1,000. The smile vanished like it had never been there. His lips pressed into a thin, colorless line, and he just stared. Then he started muttering, not to me, to himself. Hands pressing to the sides of his head, pacing. I caught fragments. Always lying, numbers wrong again. You said. The air in the room seemed to thin. I think it's best we call it a night, I said carefully, stepping toward the door. He didn't move. Sir, I said, sharper this time, it's late. That's when his hand slid toward his back pocket. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just did it. 2 steps, then I was halfway up the stairs. Heart in my throat. I didn't hear him follow. No footsteps, no voice. In my closet, I kept a .45. My hands shook as I loaded around. I crouched behind the bedroom door, breathing shallow, listening. The house was silent. I eased the door open a crack. The hallway was empty. I edged to the top of the stairs, looked down. Nothing. I locked the door, called the police in a whisper, told them everything. They told me to stay hidden. Officers were on the way. Minutes crawled by. Sirens grew louder. When I finally heard boots on the hardwood, I didn't move until a voice called, "Police, call out if you're here." I stepped into the hallway, gun still in my hand. They met me at the stairs, checked my ID, ushered me outside. I stood barefoot in the gravel driveway, trembling, while 2 officers swept the house. 5 minutes later, they came out with him. He didn't fight, didn't speak, just walked between them, limp as a rag doll. One officer stopped in front of me. His face was pale. "He was hiding in your pantry," he said. "Had a loaded revolver." I couldn't speak. They put him in the cruiser. As they drove away, he turned to look at me through the window. That look, I'll never forget it. It was hate, pure and unfiltered. Like I'd ruined something for him. Like he'd remember my face until the day he died, or the day he got out. I changed the locks that night, bought a security system the next day. I don't answer Craigslist messages anymore. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I think about that 17 minutes. About how he'd said an hour, but showed up early. About whether he'd been nearby when he called, watching. He's in prison now, but someday he won't be. When that day comes, I wonder, if someone like that decided they weren't finished with you, how would you... I used to think you could tell when something bad was about to happen. Some part of you, the animal part, would recognize the shape of danger even before you understood it. That was a lie I told myself to feel safer. The truth is, the worst things don't usually come with warning. They creep in, disguised as something harmless, like a phone call or an ad online for a used bed. My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 41, recently separated, and living with my 6-year-old son, Luke, in a rented duplex on the east side of Buffalo, in a neighborhood called Fairhill. It's the kind of place people drive through on their way to somewhere else. Houses with paint faded to dull grays and blues. Small fenced yards patched with weeds. Porches sagging under the weight of years. You could say it's quiet, but quiet here doesn't mean peaceful. It means people mind their own business, even when maybe they shouldn't. Until last year, I thought my life was predictable. Not good, exactly, but steady. My husband, Greg, worked in shipping for a small warehouse by the river. I worked part-time at a pharmacy, did the after-school pickup for Luke, made dinner most nights by 5:30. We weren't fancy, but we kept the bills paid, kept Luke in sneakers that still had tread. Then Greg left, one Sunday night, without a conversation or a fight, just a half-empty closet, the echo of drawers opening and closing, and a note on the counter saying he'd be staying somewhere else. That while became forever. The week after he left, I found a smaller place for Luke and me. The duplex was nothing special. Thin walls, drafty windows, carpet that looked older than me. But it was affordable, clean enough, and it had a tiny fenced patch of backyard where Luke could kick a soccer ball in summer. We moved with what we could fit in my car and a borrowed van from my brother. We didn't have much. Luke's bed didn't survive the move. The frame had been wobbly for years, and by the time we took it apart, it was splintered in 3 places. Since then, he'd been sleeping on a mattress on the floor. It ate at me more than I let on. Every time I tucked him in, I caught him glancing at the mattress like he knew something was missing. One night, maybe a month after we settled in, he asked me when he was getting a real bed like other kids. I told him soon, but the truth was there wasn't money for soon. The pharmacy job covered weekdays, and I'd picked up early morning bakery shifts at Wegmans on Saturdays and Sundays just to make sure the lights stayed on. After bills, rent, groceries, gas, there wasn't much left. When you're scraping by, you learn how to make do. You make bookshelves out of old milk crates. You fix your own faucet with a YouTube tutorial and borrowed tools. And you start to see Craigslist as less of a second-hand site and more of a lifeline. Over the years, I'd gotten lucky there. A used microwave that lasted 3 years, a sturdy chest of drawers for $20, even a free armchair from an older couple moving to Florida. So when one Tuesday night in early March, I saw a listing for a twin oak bed frame for $40, I jumped on it. The picture showed a clean, disassembled frame, warm wood, no scratches, propped neatly against a white wall. The ad was bare bones. Leaving town, must go by Sunday. No holds, no delivery. Message if serious only. I messaged right away. Within minutes, I got a reply from someone named Alex. His messages were short, polite, maybe even a little rushed. He said he was moving out that weekend, couldn't hold it for anyone, and needed it picked up that night, preferably around 9. 9 wasn't ideal. It would be full dark by then, and the address he gave was near Kensington Street, toward the industrial edge of the city. But Luke was staying upstairs with our neighbor, Janine, for a sleepover with her grandson. I figured I could be there and back within half an hour. I thought about asking my brother to ride with me, but it felt like overkill for something so ordinary. I'd picked up Craigslist stuff alone before. You get used to telling yourself you can handle it. And when you've been doing everything alone for over a year, it's hard to admit there are still situations where you shouldn't be. I left the house at 8:30, with my hoodie zipped to the chin and my purse slung across my shoulder, promising Janine I'd be back before the 10 o'clock news. The sky had that wet, bruised look it gets when rain is threatening but hasn't committed. Streetlights reflected in dark puddles, and the city felt emptier than usual, like everyone had agreed to stay in without telling me. Alex's street wasn't hard to find. I drove slow, counting house numbers. The place was a single-family home. No lights on,
No car in the driveway. Porch light dead. Steps swept clean. The siding looked recently washed, which felt odd for this time of year. The neighborhood itself wasn't bad, just worn out. Cracked sidewalks, yards with more mud than grass, a couple of dented mailboxes leaning like they'd taken one too many hits. Nothing screamed danger, but nothing felt welcoming either. I parked at the curb, left the engine running, and texted, "I'm outside." The reply came almost instantly. "Come in, doors unlocked, bed is disassembled and waiting by the stairs." That gave me pause. Usually people selling stuff will meet you at the door or bring it outside, but I told myself he was probably busy packing. I sat there for another 30 seconds, debating. I needed that bed. I hated the thought of telling Luke I'd come home empty-handed again. So, I went in. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside smelled faintly of damp wood, like a lakeside cabin after rain. There were no lights on, but the weak glow from the street lamp behind me bled through the front windows just enough to outline a table, a single chair, and a leaning coat rack. I called out, "Alex, hello?" Nothing. But the bed was there, exactly like in the photo, leaning against the staircase, frame, slats, screws in a Ziploc bag. Resting on top was a small white envelope with my name printed in neat block letters, Claire. I frowned and picked it up. Inside was $40 in 20s, and a Polaroid photo. I pulled it out, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, standing on the porch, taken maybe 30 seconds earlier. I froze. My mind stuttered between disbelief and an animal urge to run. The angle was from inside the house, through the front window. Someone had been standing there, camera in hand, watching me before I even stepped inside. My hands shook as I shoved the photo back in the envelope and turned toward the door. It was closed. Not just closed, jammed. I twisted the knob, yanked hard. Nothing. I shoved my shoulder into it. Still nothing. Then I heard a voice from upstairs. Low, male, with an edge I didn't like. Another voice followed, higher pitch, younger, coming from the hallway. "She smells different than the last one." My chest tightened until it hurt. I scanned the room. That's when I noticed the hallway mirrors. Tall, narrow, shoulder-width panels mounted side by side. Something was off about them. They didn't reflect properly. Angles bent strangely, like funhouse glass. And behind one of them, movement, a shadow, human-shaped, shifting just enough to confirm it wasn't my imagination. Something broke loose inside me. Not fear exactly, something sharper. I grabbed one of the oak bed slats, swung hard at the nearest mirror. It shattered, spraying glass across the floor. Behind it wasn't a wall. It was a crawl space, narrow, lined with insulation and exposed studs, just wide enough for a person to slip through. Someone was inside. I caught a blur of black hoodie and pale skin disappearing into darkness behind the next mirror. I didn't wait. Another swing, another shatter, another narrow passage. How far did they go? How many rooms? I didn't want to know. I ran at the door, throwing my whole...
I wasn't supposed to be apartment hunting by myself. That had never been the plan. Melissa and I had made a pact years ago, in one of those half-serious, half-hopeful conversations you have during college.
We were going to move in together after graduation. Split rent, split utilities, maybe adopt a cat. It was going to be easy, familiar. She'd cook, I'd clean, no awkward Craigslist strangers, no risky Facebook marketplace meetups, just two best friends figuring out life together. Then her job offer in Portland got delayed by months, maybe longer, and everything shifted. I'd already accepted a position as a veterinary technician in Brighton, about 2 hours from the town I'd grown up in, and the start date wasn't negotiable. My parents made it clear they loved me, but also that my old bedroom wasn't meant to be permanent again. I needed to move out before the first of the month. I told myself it was fine. Just find something cheap and temporary, a 6-month lease, maybe even shorter if I could swing it. And then I'd join Melissa wherever she landed. The problem was, Brighton rent was merciless for someone making just above minimum wage and still paying off student loans. By the third night of scrolling rental websites and classifieds until my eyes hurt, I ended up somewhere I swore I'd never look for housing: Craigslist. The ad was almost absurd in its simplicity. Room for rent, female roommate only, $225 a month. That was it. No long paragraph about the location, no lifestyle description, no quirky personal details about the current tenant. Just a single photo of the front of a white-paneled single-story house. $225. In Brighton, that was unheard of. Even for a bedroom in a shared house, you'd expect at least triple that. The listing claimed the owner was a 23-year-old nursing student looking for a female roommate. Utilities included: private bedroom, private bathroom, no men, no pets, quiet neighborhood. The photo made the place look a little tired, grass overgrown, porch swing crooked, but not dangerous, not at first glance. I hesitated. Too good to be true was practically Craigslist's middle name. But desperation makes you bend rules you promised yourself you'd follow. I sent a quick message. "Hi, my name's Talia. I just accepted a job in the area and I'm looking for a room to rent quickly. Your place looks perfect. Would love to stop by and see it. I'm respectful, quiet, and I don't smoke or have pets. Thanks." 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a reply. "Hey, I'm at work now, but can you come by tomorrow evening? Say around 8. I work nights, so that's when I'll be home. I'll text to the address. Just use the back door. Front's broken, LOL." No name. No Sarah or Emily at the end. I told myself she was probably just in a rush. Nursing students had weird hours. Vet techs did too. Still, when I called Melissa the next morning to tell her, she went quiet for a beat before saying, "Craigslist, Talia? Seriously? That's how horror movies start. You're not going alone, right?" "I'll text you the address," I promised, "and I'll call you after. If I vanish, you've got my last known location." She didn't laugh. By the time the next day rolled around, I'd convinced myself she was overreacting. The logical part of me said this was just another overworked student who didn't have time to fuss over a formal showing. The address took me further out than I expected. Brighton's main streets faded into quiet residential blocks. Then those blocks gave way to longer stretches of road, flanked by tall grass and scattered houses, each sitting alone on its own plot of land. There were no streetlights here, just the deep blue dimming sky and the hum of cicadas in the fields. At 7:55, I pulled into a gravel driveway. The house from the photo sat ahead, its siding dull with age, its front porch sagging slightly in the middle. The blinds were drawn tight over every window. The only light came from a faint yellow glow deep inside, maybe the kitchen. There was a note taped to the front door, in slanted handwriting. "Door broken. Please use back." Something about it made my stomach turn, but I told myself it was just the rural quiet that felt off. The backyard was even darker. The grass brushed against my shins as I walked around the house, gravel crunching under my shoes. The back door was a screen door, hanging slightly ajar. I knocked. It opened almost immediately. A man stood there, not a nursing student, not 23. He looked mid to late 40s, hair long enough to brush his shoulders, greasy in the porch light. His denim shirt was wrinkled, sleeves too short for his arms. Hi," I said, stopping short. "I think I might have had the wrong—" "Nope, right place," he cut in. "I'm the landlord. She had to work late, asked me to show you around. Come on in." He stepped back, holding the door wider. My gut clenched. The kitchen behind him was dim, light from a single bulb barely pushing back the shadows. I couldn't see much beyond the table, if there even was one. "She said you were coming," he added. "Talia?" he added. The sound of my name jolted me. I hadn't told anyone except Melissa. "Yes," I said slowly. "She mentioned it," he replied, too quickly. "Come on in, you'll love the place." Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and something burnt. The kitchen counters were bare. No coffee maker, no dishes, no magnets or mail, just empty space. He moved ahead into a narrow hallway, talking over his shoulder. "I try to keep it clean. Needs a little work, sure, but that's why rent's cheap." The bathroom he showed me was spotless, but impersonal, like it had never been used. No toothpastes, just a towel that looked folded straight from the store. The bedroom was worse. A bare mattress on the floor, a folding chair near the window. That was it. "Where's her room?" I asked. "She's private," he said, glancing toward a closed door at the end of the hall. "Doesn't like people in her space." "Is it just you and her living here?" I pressed. He hesitated. "Yeah, just me. Just her and me." He gave a short laugh that didn't match his eyes. Something in me clicked, a sharp, instinctive warning. "I think I've seen enough," I said. "I'll email her if I'm interested." He stepped in front of me, slightly. Wait, best part's the basement. You gotta see it. Finished space, could be anything you want, real big." He moved toward a door near the kitchen. When he opened it, it swung wide enough to block my path to the back door. "Ladies first," he said, gesturing toward the pitch-black stairs. I stared into the dark. The air felt colder coming from below. I forced a smile. "Actually, my boyfriend just texted. He's outside. I didn't know he was coming, but he's here. I should go let him in." I hadn't looked at my phone once. His eyes narrowed. "Boyfriend? Thought you said you'd be living alone." "Yeah, well, he likes to surprise me." I stepped sideways, sliding past him without touching his arm, keeping my back to the wall. The screen door gave slightly under my hand, and then I was outside. The night air hitting me like a shock. I didn't walk, I ran, through the tall grass, gravel sliding under my sneakers, straight to my car. I fumbled the keys, yanked the door open, and tore out of the driveway before I'd even buckled the seatbelt. That night, Melissa stayed on the phone with me until 2 in the morning. She was the one who insisted I called the police. The detective I spoke with the next day didn't waste time with small talk. "That listing's gone," he said. "We ran the address. Property's been vacant 8 months. Foreclosure. No utilities, no tenant, no landlord." My mouth felt dry. "What about inside?" "We checked the basement," he said after a long pause. "Looks like someone's been living there. We found blankets, food wrappers, some items." He paused again. "There were belts tied to a wooden stick, a box with duct tape, and fishing twine strung across the bottom steps, shin level, enough to trip someone in the dark." The silence between us felt heavier than the words. And, he added, "You were lucky. Don't go into strangers' houses, Craigslist or not." I hung up and stared at my hands. They were trembling. I've never looked for a place on Craigslist again. And to this day, I don't go into a basement without the lights already on.
Because somewhere, in a darker version of this story, I stepped first into that basement. And I don't think she ever came back up. What do you think is more terrifying? The thought that he was planning to hurt me that night? Or the possibility that I was just one in a long list of people who never made it out?